Welcome to my channel. To start off your pattern making, fold your pattern in half. Now I would make a straight line, a marginal line at the top of my pattern, right there. This is going to be a pattern for a 6 years old to 8 years old. This is going to be the measurement I am going to be using. Now my measurement is going to start from that line I drew. Now for children of 6 to 8 years old, their shoulder to shoulder measurement is about 12 divided by 2 is 6 inch. Then I added half inch seam allowance right there. Now I mark half inch downwards for the shoulder slanting, and I mark 3 inch right there, and I am going to slant my shoulder down to the 3 inches. Now the next thing is to take your armhole measurement. For children, your armhole measurement would be 6 inch plus half inch for joining, that is 7 inches. Now I connect the lines. On that line, you're going to take your chest measurement. Now before we do that, we're going to take our neck measurement. The neck measurement I am using for this pattern is 2¼ inch in width and 3 inch in length. Now I connect the lines and create my curve. Now the next thing is to take the child's waist, shoulder to waist measurement. The shoulder to waist I am using is 13 inch. That is, all these measurements are standard for children measurements. Now on that line, I take 1 inch downwards for joining to anything you want to join to it, be it your ball gown or a skirt. I take my chest measurement, which is 27 divided by 4, and my 1½ for seam. Now I take my waist measurement, which is 24 divided by 4 plus that allowance, that is half inch, plus my 1½ for seam, and I connect the line to my chest measurements. Divide your shoulder by 2 and come in by half inch and connect your armhole curve just like I am doing. Next thing to do is to cut out your pattern. This is going to serve as the front pattern. Now there is something I usually do whenever I am making my pattern. On the shoulder to shoulder joining, I usually add half inch right there on my fabric, or I add it right there. I add half inch right there at the bottom of my waist on my fabric, be it the waist or a long dress. I add it at the bottom for the joining. Now I would place this on my fabric and cut. Now as you can see guys, I am done cutting, and you can see I added half inch for the joining of the neckline and the joining of the shoulder to shoulder measurements. Now we are going to proceed to creating the back pattern. Now I am also going to draw this marginal line just because I folded my pattern in half so that everything will be equal. So now I am marking 1½ inch for my zipper allowance, and I am going to connect it straight down. Now my measurements are going to start from this zip line I marked. That is where I will place my tape rule. Whenever you mark a zipper line, you place your tape rule right there. Now I just marked my shoulder to shoulder just like I marked for the front, and I came down by 1/2 inch just like I marked for the front, and I slanted by the 3 inches just like I marked for the front. Now we are going to use the same armhole measurements we used for the front, which is 7 inches. All that is left is to connect the lines. Now I am marking my chest measurement, which is 27 divided by 4, and I added my seam allowance to that. Now I am taking my shoulder to waist measurements, and I marked that right there, and I added my 1 inch for seam allowance. Now I mark my waist measurements plus that and seam, and I connect just like I did for the front. Now I am dividing my armhole into 2, and I just connect right there, and that will be all for the armhole. Now for my neckline, I am going to be using the same 2 1/4 inch I used for the back and 1/2 inch in length. Now create your curve. And your pattern is done, and the next thing you're going to do is to cut out. The only thing that differentiates your front and back pattern is the zipper allowance at the back, the neckline, and the armhole. That's the only thing that differs in making your front and your back pattern. Now every other measurement is the same. Now for that zipper allowance folded, I am going to cut that part open. That way I have two equal center backs. Now go ahead and cut your fabric, cut your lining, and set aside for sewing. Now to mark your darts, fold your zipper part out. Take your zipper part off. Take your marking on your waist measurements, excluding the allowance. Now divide what you get into 2. Now on that measurement, I will be taking about 6 inch for my darts. From that line, I will take 6 inch upwards for my darts, and I will make a straight line right there. Now I will take 1/2 inch on each side of that line, and I would connect that to the apex of my line. This is how you make your darts on your pattern. And the next thing you do is to place it on your fabric and notch at each lines. Make a notch at each lines. That way you have the notch on your fabric. Now the next thing to do is to mark the 1 inch you marked on for your seam, just like I did for my pattern. Now I will take my 6 inch for the apex of my dart, just like I showed you on my pattern, and I connect my straight line, and I take the 1/2 inch on each side. Now I would go ahead and do the same for this other fabric. To sew your dart, fold your fabric this way and sew the 1/2 inch together, and do the same for the other center back. Now to do the front is still very much the same way you did the back. Just place your tape rule on your waist measurement, excluding the seam allowance. Now I will take 5 inch from that line and take a straight line and take 1/2 inch on both sides. Now the back measurement is, the back dart is always longer than the front dart. Remember, I took 6 inch for the back dart. Now I am taking 5 inch for the front dart. Now just like I did for the back, I am going to do the same for the front. Place your pattern on your fabric and notch on each lines. Now once you're done, you can see the line appeared at the other side of my pattern, and it's going to do the same for the fabric. Now I am going to go on and mark my darts just like I did for the back. Now this is how you sew your dart, just like I showed you earlier on. Fold it and sew on that 1/2 inch, fold on the straight line and sew on the 1/2 inch. So guys, say you want to make pleats or gathers, all you have to do is times your waist by 4. The child's waist is 24 times 4. Then you add your seam allowance at the bottom, and you also add your seam allowance at the top, depending on the material you're using, maybe a tulle net or a lace. Now use your needle and start gathering your nets. And if you're making pleats, just start making your pleats. With time guys, we're going to do all of this. We're going to treat all of them one after the other. Now in case you want to make a flay skirt and join it to the waist, all you have to do is fold your pattern or fabric in half and divide your waist by 6 to 8. Mark what you get right there on the waist, and then you take your length measurement, that is your waist to knee plus seam allowance, and then you also add seam allowance at the top. It's really simple guys, there is nothing to it. Once you cut out, you have your flay. See you in my next video guys. Cheers.